Now, in terms of adoption going forward, one of the things you sort of have spoken in the past about is nation states adopting it as a central reserve asset. I guess what we've seen over the last few years is the dollar has been weaponized against countries that are not necessarily friendly towards it. And if you care about humanitarian causes too, then those citizens unjustly get punished as a result, as they're effectively cut off from the global financial system. How big a role do you think the nation state adoption is going to play in the next 10, 20 years?
I think over the long term, it's going to play a huge part. I think short term, probably less so. I think it was pretty surprising that we saw some nation state adoption as early as we did, with El Salvador essentially adopting it as a reserve currency for their country. So El Salvador made Bitcoin legal tender. You can pay for goods and services in El Salvador without paying any taxes with Bitcoin. And they also started accumulating it for their foreign currency reserves. I thought that was pretty surprising that something like that would happen so early. And you're also correct that there are a lot of nations out there who would prefer that the world had a more neutral global reserve currency. The US dollar is certainly not a neutral reserve currency. The US has political views and it likes to project those political views out into the world. And some countries are okay with that, but a lot of countries are not. And so I think you'll see adoption from some of those countries probably before. I think this is unfortunate as well. I think we'll see adoption from places like North Korea and Iran, perhaps before we see it from countries like the US and Australia and Great Britain, which I think is a real tragedy because I think we the earlier countries adopt this, the more they benefit as it gets globally adopted, as I believe it will. And it would be really sad to see these Western countries, which have these great liberal values that most of us subscribe to, like the rule of law and property rights and freedom of speech, all of these things we think are really important. It would be really sad to see them last in line to the world adopting a Bitcoin standard and then seeing these other impoverished countries enriching themselves by adopting it early just simply because they don't want to live under US hegemony.
Absolutely. It's almost as if the more privileged you are, the less clear Bitcoin will be to you and the less of a problem you have, because you don't really see a big problem. If your currency is melting at 2 to 5% per annum, it's not a big deal. But if you're living in Zimbabwe or, South Africa, where I'm from, and you know that it's programmed to debase virtually against the US dollar by more or less 10% per annum, suddenly now you start thinking about trying to preserve your purchasing power.